a vast majority of the U.S. population. Barna did some research, and of the 53% that are unchurched or unaffiliated, 25% of that population identified as spiritual but not religious. Essentially, they had some abstract idea about, and then I believe it was 83% actually believed in some idea about God. So we're talking about like 8 out of 10 people go, yeah, there's God. And then beyond that, it's kind of like a shoulder shrug. Like it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, all of those things. And so that's opportunity. So the 3 subgroups that we can look at within the spiritual but not religious, we've got the I love Jesus but not the church. And we probably have some of those people in the room. I'm just kidding. But seriously, within the organized church, there's a lot of those people who just kind of partake. I love Jesus. I love his teachings. I believe he's reconciling and restoring me and this world and creation. But I don't know if I'm digging the church. Like I'm sorting it out. And that's a real population inside and outside that there's a lot of opportunity. We talked about opportunities, and we looked at weaknesses, the things that we've stunk at. Let's just say, as brothers and sisters, as Christians, as apprentices, we just haven't done well representing on big scales and small, locally and whatnot. And so there are a lot of hurting people who love Jesus. They're mad about him. They walk with him intimately, but they're just not into the church. And I believe there's opportunity to make space for those people, a real opportunity, because we know that we're formed in community. The second kind of subgroup within the spiritual but not religious, they kind of live with this worldview. I believe there's something bigger than me. It just isn't that important. So they believe in some higher power, some connection to energy, to the earth, to one another, but they're not really willing to do the work, to participate with it, to do more study than that. They would literally just like there's something bigger than me. I believe that there's meaning to life. Right now, it's just YOLO. You only live once. And we'll talk about millennials here in a second. But I believe there's something bigger than me, and it's not that important. We have opportunity to make space for them to experience that it does matter. It is important. The trajectory of our lives are ultimately in the hands of God. This relationship, this community, this mission is life. And we can make space for that. And so there's opportunity for folks who are literally willing to say, I believe there's God, I just don't really want to deal with it. If we can find a way to make a space for them to be excitable, feel welcomed and celebrated, and be able to ask questions, and ultimately have an experience, an authentic experience, that'll be the biggest thing. We'll talk about spiral dynamics in a second, but most evangelical churches, they're not worried about that population. We're making the space and we're inviting you into the club. If you don't fit into these parameters, well, you'll sort that out yourself. And I think there's opportunity to maybe get rid of some of those parameters, make space for them, and let Jesus form them. Because that's what he did to me, and that's what he did to you ultimately. The third one, it's vital to connect to whatever it is bigger than me. So they're serious about their spirituality, they're just nuanced. So they sprinkle a little bit of Jesus with a little bit of Buddha and a little bit of and they're nuanced. They're kind of welcoming and all-inclusive in theology and understanding of spirituality, but they take it really, really seriously. Maybe more seriously than folks in this faith community. It's just very nuanced. It lacks some structure. It certainly lacks some orthodox tradition. And so a lot of times that's offensive or opposing, and I would say it's opportunity. Jesus is mad about them, and he's exposed himself to them in some small way because it's a part of their spiritual practices. And so what would a community look like that fostered that space for Jesus to continue to shape them? The things they're excited about that he's doing in the world and in their life and what he taught. And so the spiritual but not religious makes up a massive part of the unchurched population. Most people outside of here aren't just shrugging their shoulders as cold-blooded atheists who, are chasing Christians with pitchforks. They're just struggling with us. And so we can see that as frustrating, we can see that as a problem to solve, or we can see it as opportunity. for space, for dialogue. So church is a verb. You've heard me say it multiple times. And again, I want to be careful. Some of the things I say are abstract. So you're looking for a definitive answer, and it's going to be messy, is what I'm telling you. And for folks who are older than me, which I think is everyone in this room, you know that. You've lived life. You know that this is messy. It's not a linear path, and there's not a playbook where it's A plus B equals C. And so church is a verb, church is action. It makes space. It doesn't define space and invite in, but we usher everyone into a space for God to shape them in His fashion, through His means and in His likeness. Again, over time, we're going to talk more about that demographic, but I want to make it known that most folks who aren't hanging out in the organized church, they're really, really into God, into some semblance of spirituality. And so we can either stoke that flame or we can put it out. I think that is a real opportunity. And we'll talk about ways in which we can participate with that community specifically. I can even bring up the reason I was intentional in opening the 2 nights with kind of ancient means or methods for praying is they are excited about Christian mysticism, if you're not familiar with that idea, but kind of the centering prayer of Thomas Keating or Thomas Merton, some of these mystics, these famous, Thomas Merton, some might say, like him and C.S. Lewis have had maybe the biggest footprint on American Christianity, actually. I read an article that was titled that. But people love mystic Christianity, spiritual, connecting Christianity with God through the Spirit. And praying like that fosters space, using ancient prayers, moving forward. It's a beautiful legacy that the Lord has kind of imprinted within the organized church. Let's use some of those means and not use other rigid ways that have kind of squeezed those folks out. And so that's why I was intentional with those. When we look at the millennial generation, we always get kind of a chuckle because a lot of times it's misunderstood. Folks think it's just like the heathens on TikTok, but actually the millennial generation comes a little earlier than what most think. There's an opportunity to serve, love, and live in faith community with the millennial generation. It's the least involved generation in the organized church right now by age demographic, and it's because of some of the things we talked about. It's also the generation that kind of gets blanket. The world is very critical of them and kind of puts them in this really micro box as something, and that's dangerous as followers of Jesus to do. And so I would say, as much as the memes or jokes about it is funny, we want to find space for them. And so the millennial generation, just for info's sake, 77 to 95, I'm a millennial. I'm right in the middle. And so all those jokes are about me. No. Are they really as bad as people make them out to be? And believe it or not, you're likely thinking about Generation Z, which is actually 96 to now. So they would be kind of 25 and under is kind of the Gen Z. And again, it gets blurry right around this time. But that's people younger than me. So when we're critical, we also have a tremendous opportunity. This is a unique demographic that oftentimes older congregations too, kind of post-retiree congregations, there's such a rift in worldview and things that it's almost like, why bother? Like older congregations tend to, based on data, kind of place ageism on themselves. Like they don't feel like they have a place in that ecosystem, so why even try? And I would humbly, totally kibosh that. And I'll talk a little bit about my own story. I came to know Jesus through Young Life, which is an outreach organization, and I was the millennial you make jokes about, the worst kind. And I had a lot of leaders, mentors who invested in me who I was 16, 17, and they were college age, but the most formative people in my life were often 60 plus when I was 16 to 23. I loved being invited into whole homes, coming from a broken one and having dinner. College kids couldn't provide that to me. I wanted to see people parent and grandparent. That was more formative to me than them preaching the gospel and being hip. still to this day, my best friends are folks in their 70s and 80s. The gentleman who married Courtney and I had a young life leader who was 6, 7 years older than me. I had tons of mentors, and the gentleman who married me was in his 60s. We would have weekly breakfast at Peaches in Bradenton, Florida, and we would talk about Jesus. And he is one of my heroes. He got picked over all these other gentlemen who invested maybe even more time than he did, but I just respected him so much that I wanted him to invite us into covenant. And so if you're like, I don't have a place, we immediately need to throw that out. I only want to hang out with folks who have lived. And I'll be honest, I've been a young life leader for a long time. That reigns true for Gen Z and the millennials now. They want to see wholeness. They want to see how life's supposed to be lived, not someone who's a couple years older figuring it out. They want to see whole families. They want to see wisdom. They want to see legacy. They want to see perseverance. They want to see resilience. And they want to see a life of faith modeled out for a long time, not just a couple years longer than they. And so those are a couple things, and I'll double back to that because that's really critical. We have a large retiree senior population here at this church, and so you're either all going to pat me on the back and say, go get him, Tiger, or we're going to link arms and we're going to go participate. And I think you have more to provide than I do. That's not me copping out. I'm just saying. Millennials, Gen Z, they want to hang out, and here's why. I won't get into it tonight. There was a school of thought within psychology called spiral dynamics. And if anyone familiar with that at all? It's a school of thought that essentially it's this spiral of the evolution of psychological thought for humanity, and we're moving towards kind of awareness and worldview. And it changes in seasons and times. And so there was a study done by Barna, and they looked at the millennial generation, and they wanted to basically accumulate data on what made them tick. They get a bad rep, but what is moving the millennial generation to live as they are? And what is so fascinating is they actually, it's about 50 years ago, the green worldview is about 150 years ago they started forming it, and then they kind of shaped it in the last 50. And so this is the worldview of the 77. This is kind of their default. This is how they see the world. This is their deepest longings, their deepest earnest. And I want to show you this because I want to ask you who it looks a lot like. So through the lens of spiral dynamics, and they kind of used an algorithm. They would ask them questions about, would you choose this or that? Or what would you prioritize? And they would give them multiple choice. So they weren't just giving them like the most righteous answer and then they're picking A because it seemed like the kindest. No, they gave them kind of these algorithms and then they summarized by placing them within the spiral. And so from 1977 to 1995, the millennial generation, these were the four kind of lifeblood, vantage, worldview, kind of core values of this generation. And I'm going to read them. The human spirit must be freed from greed, dogma, and divisiveness. That is a foundational core idea that is wildly important to this millennial generation. Feelings, sensitivity, and caring supersede cold rationality. The worldviews before them, orange and blue, they wanted answers. You get apologetics, you get Billy Graham out of that. I want the facts, I want the truth, give me the goods. You get Lee Strobel, right? If anyone's read The Case for Christ. They want answers, they want proof, and I need proof for my proof. They don't want cold rationality, they want experiences, feeling, sensitivity, the caring. It supersedes having all the answers. It's fascinating. Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. Because you're thinking, if you have a millennial child or a grandchild, you're like, no, they want the answers. But no, they would far outweigh feeling, sensitivity, caring over cold rationality. It spreads the earth's resources and opportunities equally among all. So they have a heart for the poor. They have a heart for the earth. Very green mindset within renewable energy and things like that. And so, again, I only highlight these things because it's vitally important for them. And so if we're pushing an agenda on them that doesn't align with these, then we'll never be able to make space for them. For me, you'll never be able to make space for me. Reaches decisions through reconciliation and consensus processes. They're about due process. Refreshes spirituality, brings harmony, and enriches human development. They prioritize spirituality, connection, harmony with humanity, with the earth, and you can see these things as maybe threats. I don't even know, but who does this look a lot like in his teachings? It's a trick question. It's Jesus. We just summarized Jesus. And those pesky millennials, this is their core being. This is their default worldview and understanding and priorities and motivator of how they want to live. These ideals. This is not a threat. This is the grandest opportunity because, and I think, humbly, of all the denominations within the main line, the Methodist Church maybe aligns most with these as far as priorities and things that they're putting in literature, on their websites and things like that based on my study. You could tell me many of you have been a Methodist far longer. I've been here like 8 weeks. But I read that list and I have so much hope for the intersections that we might be able to create and the space that we might make. So again, great info in theory. Where do we go from here? So often for a trip, a map is helpful, but maps, they tend to be linear. And we know that this is not linear. The church and the spiritual life is not that cooperative. So think about the tool being more like a compass, simply telling us the direction to head more so than the exact route or plan. I'm going to breeze through this. Because at the end of the day, this is the initial conversation. You're going to hear this language and these ideas many, many times. So within this job description, there was emphasis, abstract emphasis at that, on building teams. And kind of through prayer and process and my own experience and then the filter of that, these are kind of the 4 methods, the 4 ways that we're going to participate in outreach. I'm going to get in them. And so if on your table, I printed it because it's real small in the PowerPoint, but there's literally, I spent way too much time on it, but there's a modelletic, there's kind of a model that might show how we might participate in this. But so incarnational ministry, that's the biggest cog. That's the 2 big arrows if you're looking at the thing on the table. That's the 2 biggest things. It's literally central to who we are. So we're going to get into what 5,000 or listen phase of ministry approaches mean, but think weekly spaces, think affinity groups, volunteer opportunities, fresh expressions, which we'll talk about. So incarnational ministry, I put pole fishing. This is person by person, if you're a fisherman or woman. This is person by person. Who in here did their homework from last week? Their homework was learn someone's name and then use it back to them. It's dangerous to give homework because oftentimes we do it just to say we did it. But there is some thought behind it. And the thought is that we have to listen because we need to know their name to be able to say it back to them. There's also science that folks, there's a spiritual side of the brain, and neurologically, it's enlightened. It kind of sparks up. They see action when people hear their own name, even if it's from afar. You guys have been in a circle and heard your name, whether it's actually you or not. Josh, millennials, there's a trillion of us. So I hear my name all the time, and I go, ooh, but you don't know me, so you're not talking about me. But it still flashes because there's literally neurons that kind of tell us, hey, stimulus, endorphins, this is good. Someone said my name, and so using it back is really important. Incarnational ministry, we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The second tier, and again, I want you to picture this. On the modelletic there, we've got the big arrows, and it's going to be the core of all things, and I'll get to it in a second on here in the picture. I'll guide you through it. And then the arrows get smaller. Because at the end of the day, incarnational ministry, pole fishing, getting to know people, becoming part of the fabric of our community, think weekly spaces like affinity groups. Affinity groups are what we do for fun, hobbies, places where people are hanging out, people are present consistently. And we'll talk a little bit about that even in comparison to your homework, because you often go and you say hello to the bagger at Publix, which is great. That's hospitality. But oftentimes you can't go at the same time. Well, maybe you can, but it's unique. He or she is working, and you can't go at the same time of week and expect to kind of create this intersection with them, which is what incarnational ministry is. Same time, same place, same people trying to become familiar and part of a community as strangers. But incarnational ministry is the biggest. If you're thinking through a funnel, moving them towards a faith community, it starts there. Everything comes through and comes from incarnational ministry, participating as a stranger, going and being present in the community. The second thing, and it's the second biggest arrow, you can see on your doohickey, which I'll pull up in a second, there are 3 arrows. The second largest one, in comparison to those two massive ones, that's how important incarnational ministry is, missions and ministry partners. That's what I would call net fishing. We're creating an overlap, and I'll explain a little bit. Missions here at First Church are unbelievable. The missions team and the things that we're doing in the community are unreal. But our missions chair and our missions team would tell you they're predominantly mercy ministries that do not create intersections for fostering discipleship. And so missions are a great opportunity if we have the right intentional mindset. And or it can just be handing out something, which is awesome. Not bad, but will we see it as opportunity or, meeting a need? And simply that, a physical need, when we can invite them and foster a relationship for discipleship. So missions and ministry partners. So this is co-laboring with an existing mission or parachurch ministry partner. So who does this better than we can? So you've got a passion, a zeal for something. You can enter into that space in the community and kind of pull fish and do it all on your own, or you can overlap with someone who's already doing it and doing it better than you ever could or we as a faith community ever could, and link arms. Things like this might be ministries for teenage moms, ministries for teenagers, ministries for... So maybe it's partnering, we co-labor with Peace Cafe, and so it's a co-laboring. We can do it better together. And so a lot of times if you're kind of seeing a way or a need that you want to meet but you don't quite know how to get there, it's finding out who's doing it already and meeting them there. Excuse me. So who can do this better than we can? And again, it's net fishing. It's more efficient, and it's vital to how we might participate. We'll talk a little bit about the actual ideas. So outreach events, they get smaller. Those arrows get smaller. And a lot of times when people think outreach, they think outreach events. We're going to do a bunch of stuff, and we're going to put a logo on a tent and a logo on a banner, and people are just going to show up in droves afterward. That does not work. The smaller the arrow, the smaller the return on investment. And that is really important to know, because we're not in the branding industry. We're in the discipleship. We're the church. And so they're a part of the cog. Don't get me wrong. We're going to participate with events, and we will have our logo out there, but the return on investment is very minute. And at the end of the day, it's not our goal just to do stuff to say we did stuff. So things hosting on site or on behalf of, with the hope to create a memory and make our faith community recognizable. That's really, oftentimes too, what's sad is historically churches will do events and they don't even meet a need. It's just like, we should do this. It would be fun. And that's not bad either, but at the end of the day, return on investment and the effort necessary are lacking. And then finally, it's 2021, you have to have a means of marketing and communication. I met a young man down here at the coffee shop, and he came to Jesus through YouTube. He's 24 years old. He feels called to ministry. I was blown away. He was scrolling through his YouTube feed and watching exercise videos and skateboarding and pranks, and then he came across someone who was verbally proclaiming the gospel. And he sensed the Spirit in his room, and he fell on his face, and he started a relationship with Jesus. So there is space for that. There's a need for that. Again, return on investment, and it's messy because it's still kind of a transaction. We're not fostering space per se, but we want to share what we're doing and celebrate what God's doing and be innovative in the way that we are articulating the gospel. And so that's a small piece. It's the smallest arrow, and that would go with social media, mass USPS media, and so for things like Easter and Christmas, we need to do that. We need to invite people. That's part of our job, and we probably can't knock on 3,000 doors or something, so we'll do it like that. And if a few folks show up, that's good news, because they'll experience Jesus prayerfully. But it is the smallest arrow, and it's part. So, again, looking at the modelletic, incarnational ministry is going from us, our faith community, and it's going in and through those kind of three means of marketing, communication, events, and missions and ministry partnership, and it's going back into. So the results of those things aren't to get here on Sunday. Like, our agenda isn't like, hey, we got to get them into worship. Our agenda is to build a relationship with them, to make space for discipleship. And that's often the disconnect with church growth, is we're just trying to make space for the invitation, for the ask, right? Like, where's the ask? And we create value, and then we say, you should come join us on Sunday. And there's a place for that. Oftentimes, it's at the back end of the cycle, not the front end. And oftentimes, it might even be, you can see on the right side, moving them, so we're going from the church into our incarnational ministry and back into the church, and or the arrow can keep going. You can circle around a few hundred times, and it's not time wasted if we're listening, if we're making space for the Spirit of God. People can smell agenda. The millennial generation can smell an agenda from a mile away. And if we're just church folk trying to be creative to make more church folk, then we'll be having this same conversation in a few years. Quickly, Luke chapter 10, sending out of the 72 or 70, depending on what you read. I believe this is just as, or maybe more so, helpful as any structure we see in Acts and the epistles for the molding and forming of the church in likeness with God's kingdom and its economy and purpose. They were sent to Samaria, as a stranger, and told to rely on the hospitality to know when they were to settle down. They were sent seeking people of peace. And those places was where they participated in the kingdom, mission, and ministry. As we start talking about these two approaches, and I have to zip through them to honor my time commitment, these are going to be two pivotal documents, ideas, and philosophies. Again, they're not a linear path. They're kind of a compass. There's some flex in them. The Pray 5000 1231 is something I wrote. And what was fun is I told Pastor Matt, I wrote this years ago as I kind of participated in ministry with teenagers as a way to help leaders think through incarnational ministry. And then as I started doing research within the Methodist Church, they're not identical, but man, there's some beautiful similarities within the way that the Methodist Church is inviting its faith community to think through creatively church expressions, which we call fresh expressions, ways that the church can be the church outside of the church and in innovative ways. And their process, if you go to your packet, if you have a packet, I'm going to show it up here, but it's going to be small. And so that's why I printed it out for you. The process is somewhat similar. It's the last 2 pages. The last one is the Fresh Expressions journey. And again, I won't be able to, I'll talk about how we'll look at this as a faith community and how we'll continue to grow. This isn't like a, hey, learn this and then go. This is something learned over time. This is something that we need to pray through and work through and practice. Be practitioners of these ideas. But the Pray 5000 1231, come on, Stinker, there you go. So, I have to do this really quickly, sadly. But when we start talking about, okay, this is great information. We're excited. We get it. We got to go do something. These are literally step-by-step processes that that I can begin or continue thinking about being the church. If you are type A and you need the concrete direction, these 2 worksheets will be helpful for you. In Young Life in Africa, they've got this beautiful thing where in their Bibles, on the front page, they literally carry around a document that they call their discipleship tree. And they'll literally fill it in. They'll fill in the branches of people they're praying for that they come across in the community that they feel like the Lord is laying on their heart. And then as people come to know Jesus as a way to celebrate, they'll create more branches and be in relationship with that person to kind of show them coming to know Jesus and then participating in discipleship as well. And so as you think through Pray 5000 1231, this ministry approach, I won't have time to read all of this, but you can. The idea is this. Everything has to begin with prayer. So before you take this compass in theory and you go and, well, we got to do this and we got to grow and we got to save ourselves, and pray. Pray. Where is God asking you to go? To whom is He asking you to seek? Who in the crowd shall you lead? Who then will you invite to invite others? 5,000, essentially Jesus hung out in crowds, and I want to emphasize the idea of the 5,000 as a place or an affinity group where you will enter consistently. Pray and think about quality and consistency over quantity. Once a week in the same place for 30 minutes will be far more effective than once a month for 5 hours. Where will you enter into the masses? We won't have the time to dive into depth, but we're going to spend a lot of time with that as we start an outreach roundtable, which I'll talk about here as we close. Because this is the start. We're going to continue fostering and cultivating space for us as a community to grow, to have a paradigm shift and participate with ministry as a church on the move, as a community, as a way of life. So within the 5,000, so you're praying, Lord, where will you call me? And you might be going to the grocery store. People go to the grocery store, and that might be a place where you frequent intentionally. It could be a coffee shop. It could be anywhere. The YMCA, Silver Sneakers, pickleball, pick-up volleyball, a coffee shop, a pub. All of these places entering in the same time, the same place, and asking people their name. Now, I want to get to something real quick that was brought up last week on the feedback, which we'll have at the end of this night too. What if you're an introvert? Right? What if you see this and you're like, this is my freaking nightmare? I want to do two things with that real quick. And actually, I'll just tackle both. The other feedback that I can just kind of gauge is kind of this idea of like, what if I'm older? Like, what's realistic for me? I want to look at those two things super quick. For the introvert, ultimately an introvert, it costs them a lot to be with people. So it doesn't always mean that they're shy or socially awkward or uncomfortable. I'm married to an introvert. I'm also married to someone who's socially awkward and uncomfortable. It becomes group speaking when there's more than a couple people in the circle. She clams up, and it's her nightmare. And so what's been beautiful that the Lord has done through us is as we participated through ministry, the Lord has humbled me by saying, hey, you got to do it like this. And she's done it like this, but she's done it her way. A quick story is Super Bowl party. I had all this vision. I was in ministry with Young Life in North Tampa for a couple years, and I had this contact list of maybe like 75 guys, and I'm texting them on Saturday before Super Bowl. Guys, we're going to have a party, chicken wings, come on over. It's going to be awesome. It was the year the Seattle Seahawks played the Niners, and I get to the next morning and can't make it, got our own thing, got our own party, got our own thing. It's like, shucks. I struck out. 0 for 75. 0 people coming to the Super Bowl hangout at my house. And we get closer to the game, and all of a sudden the doorbell rings. And a young lady walks in. I'm like, oh, Sydney, hey, how are you? Yeah, Courtney invited me to the Super Bowl party. All right. Another second later, doorbell rings. Emma, I'm here for the Super Bowl party. Come on in, Emma. Like I got to cook something now, but we're in. And 4 young ladies and my wife and I watched that Super Bowl. I know this is uncomfortable for introverts, but there is a way. The beautiful thing about introverts is they tend to have 2, 3, 4, 5 relationships that are 100 feet deep. And extroverts, they've got 100 relationships that are 2, 3, 4 feet deep. They're both beautiful, but they both can participate in ministry. They both can be incarnational agents. My wife is one of the most dynamic ministers I've ever served with. She talks to those girls all the time. I've got more names in my phone, but she forms the most beautiful relationships. And she sweats when she has to talk to more than 2 or 3 people at a time. If you are an introvert and this is making you tremor, there is space for you because we have to make space for them. Do not write yourself off. If you feel like I'm too old for this game, I've paid my dues, I've invested time, talents, treasures, there is space. There is space. So I just preface with that. I don't want you to hear this and go, this is exclusive. It's not. There is space. Please hear that. 12 is the forming of discipleship groups. 3 is a deeper level of discipleship, and 1 is an invitation. You know, leaders make leaders, not followers, right? I'm grazing over this because the fresh expressions, 1, you can see the continuum. Listening. It's going and listening. It's underpinned by prayer and continuing connection with the wider church, which I found beautiful. We started with prayer, and the one that I had wrote up, prayer is underpinning it. They didn't leave it out. Listening, loving people, building community, exploring discipleship, starting to get into that 12 zone, church taking shape, and then doing it again. It's not necessarily straightforward. While the Fresh Expressions journey looks neat and linear on paper, it's messier in practice. The stages are not always distinct. Listening carries through the whole journey, and new relationships are often formed during listening. You'll see later that discipleship begins long before we explicitly talk about Jesus. That's really vital. We're all starting in different places, and some readers will have many connections in their community and can gather folks quickly. Others will need to spend time building new relationships. Every journey looks different. It's a bummer because we could spend 2 hours on both of these things, and we will. And I'm actually going to skip over this part. We're going to talk about some ideas, but we're going to do it in our our outreach roundtable. But essentially, with these documents, I printed them out. The back is blank, is what I always say. Begin writing out people you want to pray with, pray for. They could be people who you know their name because they serve you your Starbucks coffee every Sunday morning, or they serve you lunch at the club, or whatever. Start praying, and start putting names on paper to pray for. It's one of the most beautiful things that we get to do as the body of Christ is pray for people by name. Pray that they might be exposed to Jesus through your witness, through your sharing. The practice of unconventional relationship is the core to our way of life. The practice of countercultural values in community. Without that, we have nothing that will last. Without that, there is little point in getting more people into our buildings. That's from a book I've referenced a couple times, Weird Church. I'm going to provide kind of in the follow-up some recommended readings as well, or places where you can pull some ideas from or get excited. That's how I get excited, is hearing other people's ideas. When the church becomes a verb and it's lived into, it will again transition back to a noun. This has been a trick the whole time. It really has. Because that's what we do. We take something as it was and then we form an institution. And then we go, you know what, we got to go back out and participate. Let's make it a verb. But in reality, it is a noun. It's not a place or a building, but it's a thing, a way of living, an existence. The ecclesia, a true people set apart, a people called out of the mainstream and into a far more beautiful stream of God's grace, mercy, redemption, restoration, and love. It is a thing. But it only gets back there if we're a movement, if it's a way of life. I say these things, I'm particular about these words because we have to pray them. We have to absolutely take them in, but we've also got to digest them. This can't be the last time you hear these ideas. If you say, oh, yeah, I went to that thing a couple years ago, then we've missed. This is the beginning of a dialogue. It's abstract, it's complex while being simple, it's inconvenient. It goes against the grain of how we've done it for a very long time. But I humbly believe this is the way that we're called to participate here in the coming days. Church as a movement is light, nimble, contextual, organic, creative, collaborative, and easily accessible. Either via an inquirer, or via someone with something to share. It meets people where they are and invites them to contribute as much or as little as they like out of a sense of abundance. It sees everyday life and discipleship formation in a unified vision. It's about groups of people getting together to dream about God's preferred future for them and their neighborhoods, and then daring to make that reality. It is ultimately about trusting that we and our neighbors together are enough and have enough to make the critical journey towards the realization of God's dreams for us. Just based on time, we'll conclude. The first step as a faith community is to digest this. The PowerPoints will be emailed out. You can take these papers home. You can text or email me anything. I'll send out articles and recommended readings, and then we'll begin dialoguing. If you didn't fill this out last week, try and fill it out this time. You just hold your phone up or on the PowerPoint on your page. If you hold the camera, bring up your camera and you do it. If you don't have your phone with you or a phone that is capable of that, reach out to us. Reach out to me through the website or any of our staff and say, hey, I want to hear more. I want to be involved more. The first step of how we're going to do that is beginning in October, prior to our 9:45 service for about 45 minutes, we're going to gather and we're going to do a couple things once a month. And we're going to start talking about this. And in the coming months, the biggest priority is talking about this listening phase and loving people phase in the Fresh Expressions journey and the 5,000 within the 5,012.3.1. Where can we go? A lot of times we get stuck with that, and it's really not that complex or difficult. It's actually a lot of fun. And oftentimes it benefits us. If you like whiskey, if you like whittling, if you like pottery, if you like exercise, if you like anything, there's a group for that. And they're already hanging out without you. And chances are there's a Facebook group. And if you don't have Facebook, somebody in here does, and they can point you that way. And they can get you on that email list. A lot of times if you go to a coffee shop or a restaurant, they'll have signs for trivia, for a writing group or a club. Here's the deal. As we think through these things and we dialogue about these things and we pray about these things, this shouldn't be pulling teeth. This should not be pulling teeth. It has to be something that you're passionate about because you're passionate about the good news of Jesus. And where you go can't be something you know nothing about. It actually has to be an affinity. It has to be something excitable. And the reality is, as I've implemented this with young life leaders, many of them got gym memberships. I said, you want to know a great place to meet teenagers and hang out and build community? There was a Crunch Fitness next to one of the high schools we served, Gaither. And we had grown men and women, older than I am, go get their $9.95 membership and strategically show up at 4 p.m. when teenagers got out and walked over there and started working out with their Young Life t-shirt on, or started going with friends they already knew and having inroads into community. And by the end of it, years later, they formed campaigner groups, which are just Bible studies. They're small groups. And they took those kids to camp. And they built relationships with their families. And those families wanted to go to church because their kid was excited about the Bible when they got back. We did this for a long time. And it really is that simple. And those grown men and women, they got healthier physically. If you go to a singing a cappella group, you're going to get better at singing. If you go to chess, you're going to get better at chess. If you go to whiskey club, you're going to get... No, don't, I'm just kidding. But seriously, there is a place. If you have a passion, if you want to get healthier, Silver Sneakers is the ticket if you've got it for free. And those groups are already hanging out, having potlucks, going to lunch after class. There is a space if we're praying and intentional. That concludes my time. I'm going to pray for us. This is a lot of information. Some of it can be discouraging. I hope not, but confusing or intimidating, surely. The reality is this isn't dependent on me. It's not dependent on Mary or Bradley, Pastor Matt. To be honest, it's dependent on Jesus. But we, as the body, are called to do this. Not for the sake of First Church Clearwater, but for the sake of God's kingdom. Because it's beautiful and fun. And we're to take up our cross. I heard a quote, following Jesus won't get you where you want to go. It gets you where Jesus goes. That's what this is. It's not an agenda. It's not a transaction. It is a way of life. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for making the time. I hope it's not the only time you make. I'll look forward to it. I'm grateful. I'm going to pray for us. Jesus, your Spirit is moving. Stir in us names, places, ideas, ways that we might make space for the populations we talked about and those we did not, for everyone. Not to hear a good word or see a good word, but to experience you. To experience rest when we are weary. And goodness when things are not good. The only way this is possible is through formation, through relationship with you. And so I pray for those in this room. I pray for myself. I pray for those who might be listening or see this, that you would do something in us. As we don't do this as laboring or a way to please you or our faith community, but out of overflowing. That we don't go do this on emptiness and will, but by and through your Spirit, and in fullness, in rest, in shalom. We're grateful for this beautiful call and the means and ways that you make it possible for us to even tie or lace your sandals. We're grateful, Jesus. May you bless and keep us in our homes. May you go before us, within us, and behind us. Lord, we pray these things in your name. Amen. Thank you guys so much. Hey, if you do that too, or if you don't do it, you can email me for feedback. That's really helpful for us as we continue to do a new thing, articulating, and if things are really fuzzy or not helpful or were inappropriate, you can please let us know. You can give feedback. And so thank you all so much. Have a great night.